Monitors washed the study in ghost blue as SUVs swarmed the gates like dark beetles. Emma Carter flattened a palm against carved wood, found the warm spine of Dante, and triggered the hidden latch. Steel sighed. The wall opened on hydraulics, revealing a chamber of thick doors, oxygen scrubbers, and shelves that looked like they had never known scarcity. Inside, Luke Russo's breathing rasped, measured by a discreet sensor bar. Jupiter, a black wall of muscle, posted at the threshold with ears pricked to distant thunder. Security overlays crawled with call signs and thermal silhouettes. Somewhere beyond stone and glass, a man used to winning assembled his defenses with exacting calm. Inside the room, a maid counted heartbeats and inventory, gauze rolls, bottled water, encrypted phones, while rain braided the lake into mercury threads. Survival had a procedure here. The first rule was simple: push the button before panic pushes you. Hours earlier, a Tuesday bled into night while city drains swallowed October. Emma stood beneath a punctured awning, shoes sponging cold, thrift jackets suctioned to her shoulders by impatient rain. She measured the distance between exhaustion and the 12 minutes promised by a transit sign that never kept its vows. The neighborhood performed wealth across the boulevard: paper-white hedges, obedient lighting, the hush of driveways that resembled galleries. On her side, gutters argued and steam coughed from manholes like tired lungs. A service schedule lived in her bag, creased in survival blocks. Donovans, Hendersons, Morrisons. Every family's shine came off under her hands. None of it stayed. She tasted metal on the air, watched lightning redraw the street into bone, and told her own shiver to quiet down. Buses were late, rent was due, pride was ironed flat and hung to dry. Above all that, rain kept punching.
The alley looked like a mouth missing teeth, bricks slicked to a bruise. She saw him as a wrong-colored shadow at first, a small suit darkened to ink, knees drawn in, hair lacquered to his forehead. Amber eyes flashed in a car's wash of light, an animal brightness trapped in a human flinch. The storm magnified everything, the chill in his fingers, the tremor in control he tried to hold. Money had dressed him this morning and abandoned him by dinner. Emma cataloged details the way cleaners do, stitched initials on a cuff, shoes too good for puddles, a scent of cedar fighting rain. She herded him toward visibility with practiced calm, turning fear into tasks, warmth, sugar, a phone number. Somewhere nearby, a family ate late dessert under chandeliers that never stuttered. Here, a boy swallowed thunder and pretended not to count seconds without rescue. Neon guttered over chrome inside a diner that had learned to ignore the hour. Steam climbed from cups with the same insistence as rent climbs from checks. The waitress moved like someone who trusted caffeine more than promises. Emma posted the boy in a corner booth, ringed him with napkins, and built heat from the inside out. Chocolate first, questions later. She inventoried his jacket for a phone and found a dead screen as cold as the weather. He recited numbers from memory. She wrote them on a napkin with cleaner's block letters that never smudged. The room adjusted to them, curiosity softening into caution. Out beyond the plate glass, rain stitched the city shut. Inside, stainless edges held the line. Emma pressed coin to counter, kept her back to the door, and pretended tired was the same as safe. Somewhere, thunder rehearsed an entrance.
The door breathed cold into heat, and the room tense shifted without a word. A tall man crossed the threshold carrying weather on his coat and certainty in his shoulders. Amber eyes, older by decades than the boy's, scanned until they found what was his. Power doesn't shout when it owns the room, it edits the air. Two suits bracketed the doorway, jackets wrong over hard geometry. Relief cracked the man's face for one exposed second, then resealed into command as envelopes appeared like apologies made of cash. Emma's refusal landed with the soft thud of a boundary rarely heard. Assessment followed, clinical and quiet, the way surgeons consider tissue. In another life, she would have faded into chrome and checkered tile. In this one, she had already stepped onto a stage that didn't allow exits. Outside, The rain kept applauding someone else's victory. Luxury idled at the curb like a threat top manners. The car's doors opened with vault hush. Leather waited the way snow waits, immaculate, unforgiving. A driver who knew where everyone lived didn't require directions. The city unscrolled in wet reflections. Lawns that never failed inspections giving way to blocks where streetlights worked part-time. Her building announced itself with peeling paint and a lock whose last job was pretending. Protocol stormed ahead of courtesy. Umbrellas materialized. Hands gestured. Assessments tallied. Inside the stairwell, damp plaster exhaled yesterday's arguments. The man's gaze mapped everything. The broken mailboxes, the calendar held up by tape, the fatigue stitched into a narrow hall rug. Emma measured what it cost to let strangers learn your corners. He left a card heavy enough to dent a pocket. He left attention heavier still. Somewhere above them, a radiator reheated its complaints.
Morning lit the city in pewter. On a borrowed laptop, search results bloomed like dandelions. Dozens of names, none belonging to the man from the diner. At work, whispers bracketed her movements. Security men with tidy hair spoke her past as if it were a ledger. Foster files, paycheck gaps, remittance notes to a family not by blood. That kind of knowledge finds you only two ways, through badges or through money. Emma's hands kept moving, because hands are allowed to panic after surfaces gleam. Brass grew honest under polish, glass forgot fingerprints, bathrooms lost their arguments with lime. Under detergent and exact strokes, humiliation hardened into a plan the way sugar hardens on cooling steel. Boundaries would be written, not asked. The storm had ferried a boy to her. A machine had ferried her life to him. Somewhere, a phone learned her schedule. Names circulated in rich rooms like perfume, sweet until weaponized. Charles Morrison lived in headlines and dinner toasts, a district attorney with a smile that conceded nothing. His address employed her twice a week. His office prosecuted men like the one with amber eyes. House gossip turned practical. Donation galas, private task forces, a new deputy with ambitions that outran his suits. Emma clocked it all the way cleaners do. Gate codes, catering deliveries, camera angles. Which hallway bulbs stayed burned out because no one important used them. Competing registries kept her in the middle of a quiet war where both sides insisted they owned safety. She carried towels through a hallway lined with framed degrees and felt the degrees looking back. Somewhere downtown, a press release chose verbs that punished. Somewhere else, a black car smooth as a verdict planned a detour.
At the curb by late afternoon, the same car distilled certainty from chrome. Nick Romano stood alongside it with a posture that turned sidewalks into checkpoints. He addressed the heir, not the neighbors, and announced an expectation shaped like politeness but reinforced by logistics. Refusal met better arguments. A schedule cleared without consent, clothes curated by a ghost who had learned her measurements by sight, a child who needed thanks arranged on a plate. The city's skyline gave way to water as fences grew taller and security more floral. Private road, private shores, security glass reflecting a woman who did not recognize herself without fluorescent lights above her. The mansion uncoiled across manicured acreage with the weight of old money and newer power. Doors swung open on soft hinges. Somewhere behind them, a boy rehearsed gratitude. Somewhere ahead, a man set a table for leverage. A guest suite received her with wealthy restraint. Lake-dark windows, marble that preferred heels, and a closet new enough to smell like packaging. Dresses tracked her silhouette with insulting accuracy. Boxes cradled shoes soft as apologies. A dressing table offered cosmetics arranged with surgical confidence. Labels whispered a promise to erase the tired that poverty draws around the eyes. This was not generosity. This was control disguised as consideration. Emma inventoried the space anyway, because survival demands you use the weapons handed to you, even if they cut both ways. She selected fabric that refused to be read as bait, a line of navy that respected knees and collarbones, heels low enough to run. In the mirror, a maid borrowed the outline of someone safer and decided not to believe it. Downstairs, a table waited under chandeliers that manufactured daylight from wire.
The house breathed with quiet staff choreography, a ballet of polished wood and vanishing footfalls. Luke appeared by ritual, hair damp, silk pajamas catching lamplight, a small inhaler tucked into routine like a seatbelt. His chest rose and fell with the metronome of medicated lungs. Sal watched the rhythm the way captains watch horizons. The child's condition folded menace into tenderness. Power learned to measure itself against an 8-year-old's airway. In the spaces between courses, Emma cataloged the accommodations: air purifiers with military earnestness, medication logs neat as bank ledgers, security protocols rewritten around a child's sprint distance. The mansion's grandeur softened for him, not for guests. Love advertised itself here in redundant filters, in dogs trained to guard more breath than property. Emma stored those details in a place stronger than suspicion. Care, when real, leaves receipts. Crystal set a firm horizon. China rehearsed its gravity. A table longer than most apartments absorbed 3 people and their weather. Staff flowed without outlines, clearing what discomfort left behind. Class difference sat down uninvited and adjusted napkins. Luke's chatter colored the room with ordinary light. Pools, drawings, the affectionate tyranny of a large dog. Sal's attention cut from son to guest with the steadiness of someone weighing risk against want. Emma balanced fork tines and scrutiny, learning the choreography of being seen by a man who was never uncertain. Food moved course to course, seasoned with silence long enough to notice. She ate because hunger has its own dignity, and because refusing nourishment can look like a different kind of poverty. Outside, Lake Michigan hammered the shoreline with patient strength. Inside, power practiced its softer register without lowering its guard.
Terrace heaters gentled the lake wind. The city performed constellation work across the water. Sal handed over a card so heavy it felt minted, the letter is sunken like seals. An offer followed that dressed itself as time, 7 days in which to decide whether survival could be redefined. Emma recognized the architecture, debts framed as gratitude, gratitude framed as destiny. She built her counter in silence, boundaries about rooms without cameras, mornings reserved for child routines, a veto on public images that used her as emblem. Agreement became a pause rather than a signature. The air smelled like cedar and something older. The house behind them set its shoulders and waited. In the reflection on the glass, 3 silhouettes formed an arrangement that didn't yet have a name. Somewhere out by the breakwater, a beacon rotated its patient refusal to panic. Morning drove the slums backward in the rear window like an old film. Emma packed light, shoes that could walk, a sweater that forgave weather, a notebook reserved for rules. The gate greeted the car by reflex. On the steps, Luke bounced in place with the sincerity only children afford. Jupiter matched him step for step, a living shadow calibrating threat and joy. Staff lined the foyer in a subtle welcome that looked like efficiency and felt like scrutiny. The house exhaled ownership and conditioned air. The lake polished its dark silver just beyond glass. Emma surrendered to a week the way swimmers surrendered to cold water, by counting down and stepping in past breath. Kitchens learned her coffee. Hallways learned her stride. Luke learned that kindness could show up twice. A machine of protection adjusted settings to include a new variable: her pulse.
Chlorine hung like a clean blade over the indoor pool, a blue field fenced by glass and stone. Luke demonstrated strokes with the intensity of a boy auditioning for permission to be normal. He named the unfairness of locked gates with the simple arithmetic children trust. If water is big, swimming should be for everyone. Emma logged the math inside the older equation of class. Places that hide their generosity behind hedges rarely understand need as anything but optics. Jupiter patrolled the tile with quiet claws, pausing to watch doorways as if entries could bite. Staff timed inhalers and towel deliveries to the beats of a doctor's note. Emma watched a child carve lanes through water and felt something lighter than fear expand across her ribs. The house had made room for breath and play. The city, outside, sharpened knives under politics. Screens chirped before breakfast, cheerful as alarms. Headlines flowered with knives. Grainy stills of a soaked maid hustled past velvet ropes, side-by-sides with glossy cars, threaded captions heavy with innuendo. A hashtag did impolite math on class and desire. The image reduced a night of rescue to a meme and named her hunger as something other than honest. Emma learned how a face becomes a battleground when it can't afford lawyers. Phones she hadn't given out rang anyway. Comment sections treated dignity like a buffet. Within the house, staff went quieter. In the city, lunch tables grew louder. Jupiter saw pixels before anyone could block them. His small frown registered the first lesson in public cruelty. Emma folded humiliation into steadier shapes the way bakers fold dough, again and again until the structure changes. Somewhere, a rival smiled without showing teeth.
Housekeeping moves like tide. Forward, back, corners chased, edges trued. In the study, leather spines lined up like jurors. Emma's fingertips found one that did not belong. Edges too crisp, signature too rehearsed. A letter claiming abandonment lay inside a folder thick with organized pain. The paper strained to sound final. The ink tried to perform truth. It read like something written for court, not for a child. Dates smudged in ways dates never smudge. Terminology a prosecutor's echo. She did not slam drawers or gasp, because trained hands do not bleed surprise into rooms where power listens. Instead, she filed the discovery behind her eyes and added it to a ledger labeled leverage. The boy upstairs deserved an answer that didn't smell like strategy. In a house of cameras and guards, the softest secret was printed in serif and filed under lies. Jupiter's muzzle told the story first, an insistence on a seam, a low growl that located malice in thread. The jacket was small and exquisite, hand-finished, with an extra weight that had nothing to do with cloth. Emma found the wafer-thin coin behind a label, adhesive still honest. Technology makes locators that can ride a child's heartbeat without disturbing a silhouette. Men with badges and men without both shop at the same stores. The timeline snapped tight. Charity gala wardrobes, overlapping guest lists, an apartment hallway visited by questions at dawn. She placed the device on marble that had never known a cheap stain and watched its red dot declare itself to someone far away. Dogs know what people pretend to forget. Danger has a scent. Intent leaves residue. The jacket became evidence. The house became a map. The week became war. Mary moved like a woman whose knees remembered 40 winters and whose spine refused to bow. In a pantry humming with cold air and stainless order, her hands found Emma's with a tremor she tried to hide. Words arrived trimmed to fit inside the refrigerator's hum. Visits from officials who asked about routines, hints about licenses the city could revoke, a suggestion that loyalty could become neglect by tomorrow's headline. Mary's life lived in this house but paid rent in another neighborhood where rules change faster. Emma read the fear under practiced composure and understood coercion when it borrowed the voice of child welfare. The pantry shelves glittered with surplus. The world beyond required 3 buses to fetch groceries. Emma filed a promise beside the forged letter. No one would turn motherhood into a weapon without meeting steel in return. Dawn peeled paint off the building on Maple Street. Men with laminated authority arrived flanked by cameras that fed on fatigue. The hallway narrowed until it felt like a throat. Neighbors formed a jury of robes and folded arms. Procedures unspooled, questions that judged, flashbulbs that indicted, hands that hovered near her few belongings as if poverty were contagious. Emma stood upright because slouching gives them angles. The raid found nothing but a bed that squeaked and a calendar held up with tape. The footage found everything it needed, a woman who worked in rich rooms standing barefoot in a poor hall. By noon, the city had decided her face fit a category. By sundown, anyone could pronounce her character for sport. She learned the exact weight of humiliation when it is arranged to look like due diligence. She carried it without breaking.
Control prefers mirrors. Cameras prefer corners. In her guest suite, a lens tolerated by no contract watched empty space with full attention. Emma felt the old heat of being observed without consent and elected a counterweight. Power had staged an audience. Power would attend an apology. She requested staff assemble with the same courtesy used to lay crystal. In that room of polished silence, Sal Russo accepted fault in a voice that had never met a lower gear. He removed the lens himself and handed it to the woman it had trespassed. The act cost him more than glass. Men who rule worlds rarely fold in public. When they do, the crease holds. Hierarchy reordered itself for 1 minute and then snapped back. Emma filed the outcome under terms met and limits understood. Respect, when paid late, arrives as interest-bearing currency. Fluorescence bred truth's least flattering light. The chamber smelled of paper and performance, microphones hissing like snakes trained for spectacle. Emma stepped to a lectern that treated grammar like pedigree and shoes like testimony. Questions sharpened down to insults and rose back up as concern. Across the aisle, Charles Morrison wore civic virtue like a good suit. She endured the ritual, credentials questioned, motives priced, compassion recoded as ambition, until the clock agreed to recognize her time. When it did, she unfolded a cleaner's weapon, logbooks. Dates, addresses, entries in a hand that never smudged. She traced the path of a planted device and the overlap of houses where photographs were taken with permission and used without it. The room stiffened. On the dais, expressions struggled between disdain and fear. Emma did not smile. Victory prefers quiet. Outside, cameras recalibrated their angles.
Detail is a solvent. Emma dripped it across the day's narrative until the adhesive failed. Gate codes, delivery windows, valet rotations, the dead bulbs no one important noticed. She mapped the corridors of privilege like sewer lines. The tracker's origin converged on a moment when uniforms mingled at a charity kitchen door, when staff became wallpaper and wallpaper grew ears. Paperwork submitted under someone else's login set off a soft alarm only clerks hear. She named times and places until alibis ran out of air. On screens, graphics departments chased her arrows with highlighter zeal. Morrison's jaw found a new angle. His deputy's pen stalled. Reputation never falls alone. It pulls chairs and donors with it. Emma left the podium lighter than she had approached it. Men who believed she owned nothing had just learned she owned record-keeping. That ownership changes weather. Blackline vehicles arrived without indecision, engines low, windows darker than excuses. Security posts changed color on the mansion's schematic. Radios clipped vowels into commands. Emma moved Luke with practiced economy, Jupiter pacing at her knee like a bodyguard who didn't need a salary. The hidden door accepted their urgency as code. Inside the room, oxygen scrubbers hummed lullabies for people who sleep next to danger. She muted feeds that taught children how violence edits frames and watched enough to count adversaries. The house became a fortress with a memory. Every prior drill announced its lineage. Somewhere on the property, men trod gravel with the confidence of belief and the innocence of pawns. Somewhere else, a father triangulated betrayal like a surveyor. The safe room's clock forgot minutes and measured patience. Outside, rain stitched threads through night, knitting resolve to steal.
When doors opened again, the smell arrived first. Ozone, hot engines, the copper whisper that follows bad decisions. Jupiter limped into the light with fur slicked along his ribs, black against black, until Emma's hands found heat where it shouldn't be. A vet's table materialized in a room that had once held flowers. Someone unpacked weight gauze with a soldier's precision. Luke's fingers hovered at the edge of bravery, trained not to touch pain unless asked. The dog's eyes stayed fixed on thresholds, a sentinel refusing anesthesia's invitation to surrender. Emma folded towels, pressed compresses, and named every breath as proof that loyalty bleeds by choice. The house quieted to make room for hurt. Outside, wealth still stood tallest. Inside,
The most valuable life at that minute wore a collar and trusted a maid's hands more than any crown. Strategy left the study like weather leaving a pressure system. Sudden, decisive, permanent. Orders went out on encrypted channels while the lake kept its face neutral. Blackline's approach had misread appetite. Response taught them new definitions. Vehicles burned information as much as fuel. Phones sang wrong names until they became confessions. Retaliation wore tailored wool and legal phrasing, moving property between shells as if revenge were an escrow service. The house did not cheer because houses don't applaud. Emma watched enough reflected consequence to catalog the price. Violence, when it is competent, looks like logistics. It erases threats and leaves invoices. In the quiet after, Sal stood alone at a window with a face arranged by control. Luke slept under monitors that counted peace as a number. Emma measured whether safety purchased this way could still be called safety, and decided truth deserves its full name.
Records hide in misfiled drawers, and inside the indifference of systems that never budget time for the poor. Emma followed clerical breadcrumbs, request numbers that skipped, signatures that repeated too perfectly, a clerk who had seen too much to care until someone cared enough to ask twice. Adrian Blake did not vanish. She was relocated. Witness protection called it safety and closed the book with a stamp that ignores birthdays. The letter in Sal's study fit the gap like a counterfeit bill fits a wallet. A paper trail curled toward an office under Morrison's jurisdiction, where custody could be leveraged into leverage. Emma held the weight of it in both hands and thought about a boy who slept better when two people took turns reading. Truth had become a living thing that required feeding and a plan. The plan sharpened itself overnight. The city loves a microphone. Morrison found one and built a scaffold of concern upon it, offering the public a version of rescue that wore legal polish. Betray the man with amber eyes, the narrative urged, or watch a child disappear into case numbers and supervised visitations. Cameras hunted Emma for the expression that would validate their captions. She answered by refusing choreography. She stood straight-backed in unflattering light and let refusal look like dignity instead of defiance. The cost arrived instantly. More headlines, louder sneers, charity boards reconsidering her existence in rooms she cleaned. But some costs purchase larger things. Luke watched a screen later without understanding half the words and slept through the night anyway. The microphone moved on, looking for easier prey. The broadcast remained, a monument to a line drawn where poor women are not expected to draw them.
Snow fell with the ceremonial patience of an oath. Candles marked a path through frost-bitten hedges, small suns declaring the cold irrelevant. On a terrace that had learned 3 seasons of their story, Sal knelt with old-world finality while the lake breathed white ghosts beyond them. Luke stood inside his bundled layers like a smaller version of the house's resolve. What the ring promised was more than jewelry. It promised a position within a machine that defended with teeth and sheltered with opulence, that punished without apology and fed those inside its circle. Emma understood exactly what permanence cost and what it purchased. She extended a hand that had scrubbed other people's mirrors until they forgot to see her. The stone caught candlelight. The boy clapped. The dog, scar-stitched and proud, approved the choreography by Wag. Winter agreed to witness. A year traced its own circle from rain to snow, from a bus stop hunger to a table that never ran out. Luke's lungs behaved, more often than not. Nightmares retreated under nightlights and measured routines. Jupiter healed into a scar that read like victory. The city did not change its nature, but it learned a new name to mispronounce with respect. Emma ran the legitimate ledgers with a cleaner's ruthlessness, waist shaved, compliance sharpened, fronts civilized into businesses that passed audits without fiction. The other ledgers remained where Emma chose not to look, because love also involves triage. Humiliation, that old acquaintance, found fewer invitations. When it arrived, it was seated at smaller tables. In a world that calculates everything, kindness proved the only incalculable variable. What began as a debt refused to be paid in cash and insisted on being paid in family.